The termination letter didn't feel like paper. It felt like a shard of glass in my hand, its edges sharp enough to sever the future I had so meticulously planned. Arthur called it an unfortunate necessity, his voice dripping with a practiced, paternal sympathy that turned my stomach. Just yesterday, that same voice had been praising my discovery of the Langston memo as the linchpin that would win us the $10 billion Rylance acquisition case. Today, that memo was a forgery, a career-ending fraud, and its creation was being laid squarely at my feet. The ink of my name on that fraudulent document was a brand, a black mark burning itself into my law school applications, my reputation, my entire life. From across his mahogany desk, Arthur's smile was a mask of regret, but his eyes, cold and triumphant, held the glint of a freshly sharpened knife. My silence in that moment wasn't submission. It was the drawing of a deep, ragged breath before a war. He had just burned my world to the ground, and I was going to build his gallows from the ashes. My world had been built on a foundation of precision. As a paralegal at Sterling and Thorne, I wasn't just organized. I was a curator of facts, a librarian of legal precedent. My mind, blessed or cursed with near-photographic recall, was my greatest asset. I could remember the exact font, size on a footnote from a motion filed 6 months ago, the precise shade of blue ink a particular partner used for his signature, the faint, almond-like scent of the archival paper in the subbasement. It was this obsession with detail that led me to the Langston memo. The Rylance acquisition was the firm's white whale. For 2 years, we'd been locked in a brutal legal battle, and the case was stagnating. The opposing counsel was stonewalling, burying us in discovery requests while hiding their key evidence. I had been working under Arthur Finch, a senior partner whose name was practically synonymous with the firm. He was the quintessential silver-haired legal titan, charming, avuncular, and possessed of a reputation as a mentor to promising young talent. He had taken me under his wing, praising my work ethic, my unflinching eye for the details that win cases. He promised me a letter of recommendation for my Columbia law application that would be, in his words, forged in starlight. I believed him, I revered him. I spent 3 sleepless weeks living in the data room, fueled by stale coffee and the burning desire to prove myself worthy of his faith. On the 4th week, I found it. Tucked away in a mislabeled digital folder titled Q3 Marketing Projections was a memorandum from Rylance's former CFO, David Langston, explicitly detailing the company's intent to engage in anti-competitive practices. It was the smoking gun, it was everything. I remember the thrill, the electric jolt of discovery. I ran to Arthur's office, my hands trembling as I held the printout. He read it, his eyes widening. A slow smile spread across his face. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and paternal. "Chloe," he said, his voice low with something I mistook for awe, "you've done it. You've won the case." For the next week, I was a quiet hero. Whispers followed me down the hallways. Associates twice my age asked for my input. Arthur paraded me into meetings with the firm's managing partners, presenting the Langston memo as a testament to the diligence of my brilliant paralegal. I was on the verge of everything I had ever wanted. The acceptance letters from my dream law schools felt like a foregone conclusion. The betrayal came a week later, on a Tuesday. I was summoned to Arthur's office. The air was different, thick with a cloying tension. 2 men I didn't recognize, stern-faced and anonymous in their gray suits, stood by the window. They were from the opposing counsel, Rylance Corp. "Chloe," Arthur began, his face a perfect sculpture of solemnity. "We have a serious problem." He gestured to the Langston memo on his desk. "Rylance's lawyers have presented irrefutable evidence that this document is a fabrication. The metadata is corrupted, the letterhead doesn't match the period, the signature is a forgery." My blood ran cold. "What? That's impossible. I found it in their own data dump." "I can show you the file path." "The file path is gone, Chloe," Arthur said, cutting me off gently. "It seems to have been wiped. All that's left is the document itself." "A document you discovered." The implication landed like a punch to the gut. The 2 gray suits stared at me, their eyes blank and accusatory. I looked at Arthur, searching for the mentor, the champion who had praised me just days before. I found only a stranger. Arthur, I didn't. What I know, he interrupted, his voice hardening just enough to betray the act, is that we have a paralegal, desperate to make a name for herself before law school, who suddenly uncovers a perfect case win-in. Memo that the rest of my team missed for 2 years. A memo that now turns out to be a fraud. It's a bad look, Chloe, a very bad look. The world tilted on its axis. He wasn't defending me, he was prosecuting me. Every word was a carefully placed brick, walling me in, sealing my fate. The praise he had showered on me was now being twisted into a motive. My ambition, once a virtue, was now the proof of my guilt. I realized with sickening clarity that the memo was a fraud. And Arthur, my mentor, had planted it for me to find. He had set the stage, cast me as the hero, all so he could pivot and recast me as the villain when the forgery was inevitably exposed. He needed a scapegoat to take the fall for his own crime, and my bright, promising future was the perfect sacrifice. The public downfall was as swift as it was brutal. Arthur, in a masterstroke of corporate theater, fired me in the middle of the open plan office. He didn't yell. He spoke in a low, disappointed tone that carried through the morgue-like silence of the 40th floor. He talked of breaches of trust and the sacred integrity of the law. Every head was turned towards me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my back as I packed my small box of belongings, a chipped mug, a photo of my parents, a well-worn copy of the Blue Book. My laptop was confiscated. My security pass was deactivated remotely, the click of the lock on the floor's entrance echoing like a gunshot as I was escorted out by a stone-faced security guard. I was erased. The fallout was immediate. The news, carefully spun by Sterling and Thorne's PR department, painted me as a reckless, overambitious paralegal who had nearly jeopardized a major case. The early acceptance offer from Columbia was rescinded, citing a review of my updated professional circumstances. The other schools I'd applied to sent polite, sterile rejections. The letter of recommendation Arthur had promised to forge in Starlight had become a black hole, consuming my future. I retreated into the suffocating confines of my tiny apartment. For weeks, I did nothing but stare at the ceiling, the same scene playing on a loop in my mind. Arthur's kind eyes turning to stone, the silent judgment of my colleagues, the heavy finality of the security guard's hand on my elbow. Self-doubt became my constant companion, a venomous whisper in the dead of night. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I was so eager to succeed that I became reckless. Maybe I deserved this. My meticulously ordered mind, once my greatest strength, now worked against me, constructing intricate architectures of failure and regret. I replayed every conversation, every email, every fleeting expression on Arthur's face, searching for the clue I should have seen. I found it, over and over again, in the oily warmth of his compliments, the strategic way he isolated me on the project, the casual mention of how a discovery like this could make a person's career. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't eve. And no, I was playing. My parents tried to be supportive, but their confusion was palpable. "But Chloe," my mother would say, her voice strained over the phone, "Mr. Finch always spoke so highly of you. Are you sure there wasn't some misunderstanding?" Their doubt was another layer of salt in the wound. Friends from the firm stopped returning my texts. I was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about over lukewarm coffee in the break room. My savings dwindled. The weight of my student loans felt like a physical pressure on my chest. I was adrift in a sea of my own failure, and the shoreline was nowhere in sight. This was my breaking point. The brilliant, meticulous Chloe was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out ghost, haunted by the future she had lost. It was during this period of intense self-flagellation that a small, seemingly insignificant memory kept surfacing. It was from about a year prior. I had been tasked with preparing a personal correspondence for Arthur, a recommendation letter for another former protégé. He had been unusually particular about the paper. He didn't want the standard firm letterhead. He handed me a single sheet from a private box he kept in a locked credenza. The paper was heavy, creamy, with a subtle texture like woven linen. As I fed it into the printer, the light from the window caught it at just the right angle, and I saw the watermark. a delicate, stylized griffin, its wings unfurled. It was elegant, distinctive, and entirely unfamiliar. It was a detail I had logged and filed away in the vast library of my mind under Arthur Finch, Peculiarities. It meant nothing at the time. It was just a watermark. My catalyst for revenge didn't arrive in a flash of lightning, but in a dusty cardboard box. 3 months after my firing, a courier delivered a package to my apartment. There was no return address. Inside was a banker's box filled with old, dog-eared case files, bound with crumbling rubber bands. On top lay a simple, handwritten note on a yellowed index card. Arthur was always sloppy with his history. Thought you might appreciate some light reading. M.A. Martin Abernathy, the firm's archivist. Mr. Abernathy was a creature of the sub-basement, a man who seemed to be composed of dust and tweed and a quiet, simmering disdain for the polished lawyers who scurried about on the floors above. He had been with the firm for 40 years and was retiring. I had always been kind to him, treating his domain with the reverence of a scholar and taking the time to ask about his intricate cataloging system. He, in turn, seemed to appreciate that I was one of the few who saw the archives not as a tomb of dead cases, but as a living repository of the firm's soul. He despised Arthur, who treated the archives with arrogant condescension. This box was not a parting gift, it was a weapon. For the first time in months, the fog in my brain began to clear. The grief and self-pity receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline purpose. Pain had transformed into determination. I spent the next week on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of Arthur's past victories. I lived on black coffee and toast, my world shrinking to the contents of that box. With my photographic memory, I sifted through 2 decades of Arthur's work, motions, briefs, affidavits, internal memos. And then I saw it. In a settled case from 2008, an affidavit from a key witness looked odd. The signature was slightly shaky. On a hunch, I held the page up to the light, my breath caught in my throat. There, faint but unmistakable, was the ghost of a griffin, its wings unfurled. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I tore through the other files with a new, feverish intensity. I found another one in a case from 2012, and another from 2015. A pattern began to emerge. In high-stakes cases where Arthur had pulled off a miraculous, last-minute win, there was often a single, pivotal document, a rediscovered contract, a long-lost email, a deathbed confession affidavit that had turned the tide. And a handful of these documents, all submitted as authentic evidence, all bore the same unique Griffin watermark. The same watermark from Arthur's private stationery. The same watermark that had been on the Langston memo. He hadn't just framed me, he had a system. He had been forging key evidence for over a decade, using a custom paper stock he probably thought was untraceable, a subtle signature to his own genius. He had gotten sloppy, arrogant, and used it one too many times. He had used it on me. My narrative voice, once choked with doubt, found a new tone, cold, sharp, and laced with the bitter sarcasm of the wronged. It was time to start probing. I created a new, anonymous email address. I sent a simple, one-line message to Marcus Thorne, the named partner of the firm opposing us in the Rylance case. Subject, Sterling and Thorne's Discovery Practices message, you might want to invest in a good paper analyst. Some watermarks tell fascinating stories. I hit send and waited. 2 days later, the legal gossip blogs lit up. Sterling and Thorne had called a surprise, partners-only emergency meeting. I pictured Arthur, his face pale, wondering which of his many ghosts had come back to haunt him. The small jab had landed. He was spooked. The metamorphosis was complete. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. Arthur's reaction was faster and more vicious than I had anticipated. He knew it had to be me. No one else had the motive or the proximity. A week after my anonymous email, I received a certified letter from the state bar. Arthur had filed a formal complaint against me for pre-admission review. He accused me of attempting to blackmail him, of threatening to release fabricated information, unless he reinstated me and funded my law school education. He included sworn affidavits from 2 junior associates, people I once considered friends, attesting to my unstable and vindictive behavior after my termination. He wasn't just defending, he was launching a preemptive strike, aiming to have me permanently blacklisted from the legal profession before I could even enter it. The hunter had become the hunted. The fear I thought I had conquered came rushing back, cold and sharp. This was no longer just about clearing my name, it was about survival. Just as despair began to creep back in, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Chloe, it's Ben Carter." Ben was a second-year associate who worked on Arthur's team. He was quiet, smart, and always seemed a little overwhelmed. I had helped him out with a few research projects, and he had always been grateful. "I shouldn't be calling you," he said, his voice a nervous whisper. "They're watching everyone's communications, but what Arthur is doing to you is wrong. He's railroading you. I have access to the firm's internal document management system. If you need anything, I want to help." A life raft, an ally. Hope, fragile and tentative, bloomed in my chest. I was hesitant, but the complaint with the bar had backed me into a corner. I needed more than just old paper files, I needed current information. I cautiously accepted his offer. For 2 weeks, Ben was my inside man. He sent me encrypted emails with internal memos, meeting schedules, and Arthur's private correspondence. He told me Arthur was growing increasingly paranoid, obsessed with finding the source of the leak to the opposing counsel. It all seemed legitimate, but a detail snagged in the web of my memory. Ben sent me a memo about the firm switching its paper supplier, dated 3 weeks ago. He said Arthur had personally overseen the change. But I remembered a notation in Mr. Abernathy's files from 5 years ago detailing the exact same new supplier. It was a firm-wide contract, nothing new about it. It was a small, insignificant contradiction, the kind of detail anyone else would miss. But my mind didn't miss anything. Why would Ben lie about something so trivial? The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a test. He was feeding me a piece of false, easily verifiable information to see if I would use it. Ben wasn't my ally. He was Arthur's spy. The second betrayal cut deeper than the first. The first was a calculated strike from an enemy I had mistaken for a friend. This was a twisting of the knife by someone who had dangled the hope of redemption, only to reveal it was a noose. I didn't confront him. I didn't let on that I knew. The game had changed again, and I now had a new, unwitting pawn. I began feeding Ben misinformation of my own. I told him I was focusing my investigation on Arthur's expense reports, that I suspected a financial motive. I sent him on wild goose chases, asking for documents related to cases that were red herrings. Through Ben, I painted a picture for Arthur of a desperate, flailing amateur, grasping at straws. While Arthur was busy chasing the phantom of an embezzlement charge, I was escalating my real plan. I used my dwindling savings to hire a forensic document examiner, a specialist in historical paper and ink analysis. I sent him 3 of the forged documents from Mr. Abernathy's box, along with a sample of Arthur's personal Griffin-watermarked stationery that I had, with my uncanny recall of its exact location, instructed Ben to find for me from Arthur's C. Redenza under the guise of needing it for a different, fabricated reason. The examiner's report was my magnum opus. It confirmed that the paper used for the forgeries was a custom stock milled by a small, now-defunct papyri in Florence, Italy. The mill had closed in 2016. Crucially, the chemical composition of the ink on the documents, when cross-referenced with their purported dates, was anachronistic. The ink used on the 2008 affidavit, for instance, wasn't commercially available until 2011. It was a scientific certainty. These documents were forgeries, all created within the last decade, all on the same impossibly rare paper. I compiled everything into a single, devastating dossier. I cross-referenced every case, every forged document, every date. I included a timeline of Arthur's career, showing how these miracle documents consistently appeared just as his reputation and his annual bonus was on the line. I added the forensic report. Finally, I wrote a cover letter, a coolly detached narrative laying out a decade of systemic, calculated fraud. I didn't write it as the victim. I wrote it as a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The stage for the climax was set not by me, but by Marcus Thorne, the opposing counsel. Emboldened by my anonymous tip, his firm had filed a motion for sanctions against Sterling and Thorne, alleging a pattern of discovery abuse. The court scheduled a formal hearing. Arthur Finch himself was scheduled to testify. The night before the hearing, I executed my final move. I sent 3 identical packages via a bonded courier service. One went to the presiding judge, Judge Eleanor Vance. One went to Marcus Thorne. And the third, for good measure, went directly to the State Bar Association's Chief Disciplinary Counsel. I sent them all anonymously. My name was nowhere on it. My fingerprints were not on the plan. I watched the hearing via a live stream from the Public Court Records portal, sitting in the darkness of my apartment. Arthur took the stand, the picture of confidence and righteous indignation. He smoothly denied any wrongdoing, painting Marcus Thorne's motion as a desperate tactic from a losing legal team. Then Thorne, holding a copy of my dossier, began his cross-examination. He didn't ask about the Langston memo. He asked about a case from 2008. "Mr. Finch, do you recall the affidavit of John Miller in the Petrochem case?" Arthur blinked. "Vaguely, that was a long time ago. The affidavit that won you the case?" Thorne prompted. "Do you recall it?" "I recall winning the case, yes," Arthur said with a dismissive smile. Thorne approached the witness stand. "I'm holding that affidavit now. It's written on a rather unique paper, wouldn't you agree? A heavy linen stock." He held it up to the light. "With a watermark, a griffin, it appears." "Are you familiar with this watermark, Mr. Finch?" The color drained from Arthur's face. His confident smirk faltered. Thorne pressed on, relentless. He produced the next document from the 2012 case, then the next. He laid out the timeline, the impossible paper from the defunct Italian mill, the anachronistic ink. He wasn't just accusing Arthur of one forgery, he was exposing him as a serial fraud. Arthur's composure shattered. He stammered, contradicted himself, and finally fell silent, his face a mask of gray, sweaty horror. He was ruined, publicly and irrevocably, in a high-definition live stream for the entire legal community to see. The Titan had fallen. A week later, I received an email from an address I recognized as belonging to Judge Eleanor Vance's clerk. It was a simple, one-line message. Judge Vance would like to meet with the author of the dossier, her private chambers. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. She trusts you know how to be discreet. I walked into Judge Vance's chambers with my heart pounding. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. My dossier was sitting on her desk. "You have an astonishing mind, MS Morales," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "To piece this all together from a box of old files, it's remarkable." "I was motivated," I said simply. She gave a slight, knowing smile. "Motivation is a powerful thing, but you didn't have all the pieces, not quite." She leaned forward. "Did you ever wonder why Martin Abernathy, a man loyal to the firm for 40 years, would suddenly decide to help you?" This was the one question I couldn't answer. I had assumed it was simple dislike for Arthur. "Martin didn't just happen to give you that box, Chloe," Vance continued, her voice dropping slightly. "I've had my suspicions about Arthur Finch for nearly a decade. He won too many impossible cases with too many convenient, last-minute documents, but I could never prove it. So, 5 years ago, I made a deal with Mr. Abernathy. I put him on a private retainer to be my eyes and ears inside Sterling and Thorne's archives, and to watch for someone on the inside with the unique set of skills required to unravel Arthur's mess. Someone meticulous, someone with an eye for detail, and someone with a reason to look. When Arthur framed you, Mr. Abernathy called me. He said he had found our champion. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I hadn't been a lone avenger. I had been scouted, chosen. My betrayal wasn't the beginning of my story. It was my call to action in a much larger, longer game. Mr. Abernathy wasn't just a savior. He was a gatekeeper, waiting for the right key. The resolution was more complete than I could have ever imagined. Arthur Finch was disbarred. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed criminal charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. The Rylance case was thrown out, and Sterling and Thorne was slapped with crippling sanctions, its reputation in tatters. 2 days after my meeting with Judge Vance, I received a call from Marcus Thorne. He had been so impressed with the anonymous teepster's work that he had done some digging of his own and easily deduced who I was. He didn't offer me an apology for what his firm had inadvertently put me through. He offered me something better. My firm is prepared to fund your entire law school education at the institution of your choice, he said, his voice ringing with respect. We're also offering you a guaranteed spot in our summer associate program with a direct path to partnership upon graduation. We value talent, MS morals. But more than that, we value resilience. My law school acceptance letters started arriving the following week, this time with personal notes from the deans. My name was cleared. My future, which had been a field of ash, was now fertile ground. I stood in my small apartment, holding the thick acceptance letter from Columbia, the heavy, embossed paper feeling solid and real in my hands. I had been betrayed and broken, isolated and hunted. But I had crawled my way out of the wreckage, not by screaming for justice, but by meticulously building a case, using the very skills they had tried to turn against me. I had reclaimed my honor, not by asking for it, but by forging it myself in the fire of my own vindication. It was a feeling beyond victory. It was liberation. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Which part of the journey did you connect with the most? Share your thoughts in the comments.